Welcome back to The Full View. The big story of the day is that Prince Mangusuthu Buthelezi steps down as leader of the Inkatha Freedom Party after more than 4 decades. We now cross to our political analyst, Xolani Dube, in our Durban studio. Good evening, Mr. Dube. Thank you for joining us.
Let me humble myself to you as well as to the viewers.
Well, firstly, in broad sweeping terms, what has been the legacy of the IFP under the leadership of Prince Buthelezi?
I think when you talk about him and his leadership in the IFP, surely number of people will say why we have to contain him only to the IFP, because he's someone who played a kind of a contested role in the South African politics, and also that contested role that he played in the South African politics is the same role that he played even within his own political party, the IFP.
Okay, so Buthelezi told delegates that he's still reeling in pain about what he says are things that were done to him by the late ANC leaders, including Oliver Tambo. He made reference to what he says were verbal attacks on him by Tambo and the then Secretary General Alfred Nzo. Buthelezi says this was done when he was opposed to the economic sanctions and disinvestments under the apartheid regime. Of course, all of this happened in the 1980s. So after all these years, he's still reeling in pain. Surely as a statesman, he should have moved past it by now, don't you think?
Look, Buthelezi, there is something that is very, let me say that he always highlights that he is the protege of the Chief Albert Luthuli. Is him who came with the concept of ANC mission in exile. And he always thinks that what he was doing with the IFP, it was kind of what Baba Chief Luthuli wanted. And also, remember that the IFP was also a concept of the ANC as well. And so when they turn against him because of his doing, and he felt that they betrayed him, and so that kind of betrayal is still in his heart, and he feels that the ANC he deserves an apology from the ANC. And so look, you have to understand that when they close doors, these politicians, they bargain and they go out and execute a mandate. And someone, when he's executing that mandate, and when the world is turning against that individual, they tend to wash their hands to say, look, we are going to put a disclaimer on this individual. He is not part of us. I think that's what Buthelezi is. He thinks that the ANC betrayed him after they had a particular agreement on certain issues in relation on the strategy and tactics in fighting against the apartheid.
And remember, it was the economic sanctions and disinvestment in South Africa, as well as a groundswell of liberation activities, that brought the apartheid regime to the negotiating table, which ultimately led to the freeing of Nelson Mandela and other political prisoners, and ultimately the passage to a democratic, liberated South Africa. So am I right in assuming that we must acknowledge the role of these liberation strategies?
Look, you know what is very interesting? One of the contestation that he had with the ANC was those imposed sanctions that the ANC was lobbying. But also, what is very interesting is that Babu Mangusuthu always see himself as a key role player towards the release of Mandela. And also he see himself as a background player when it comes to the liberation of this country. Because look, the history sometimes is, it depends on the vantage point. But the fact of the matter is, according to him, he feels that he played a very important role to the liberation of this country. And he's scared that possible the history, or those who are controlling the narrative of South African history, they want to airbrush him from his contribution And on the other side, they want to see him as a villain. But look, Mahindra, he is a man of colors. He's a man with lots of layers. And when you unpeel those layers, other people, they smile at those layers, but others, they say, look, we have goosebumps because we don't have families today. We are orphaned because of his doing. And so he is the man that you cannot simply categorize and say he's holy or he's villain. He is a person that I think the South African history will always contest around his role in the South African liberation.
Now, and if you look at the 1980s, it was a very painful period in South Africa's history. Academics have written volumes on the low-level civil war that had swept parts of the country, especially where migrant workers lived in Gauteng, what is now called Gauteng. It wasn't called that then. Thousands of people were killed in running battles between the IFP supporters and those who were from the liberation movement, as well as ordinary township dwellers. Now, you'll remember the media called that black-on-black violence. But we have yet to see the IFP bearing accountability for its role in this violent chapter of our history. Your comment?
Look, we have a writer, Anthea Jeffrey, from the Race Relations, who argue strongly against that particular narrative that says IFP was not violent, but all the black political organizations were violent. And so I think to a certain extent he's trying to justify what was happening. That's my take. And she is trying to cleanse the role that Babu Mangusuthu played. But the fact of the matter is, we have Boy Batong. You know what was happening in Katlehong. Exactly. You know what was happening in Val. I don't want to mention in KwaZulu-Natal. A number of people, they still feel that the TRC was supposed to summon the man and be accountable to the South African around his role that he played during those days. But look, sometimes we as South Africans, we always try to put things under the carpet, and people, they cry alone in their corners. And today, Mangosuthu has managed to reincarnate himself as the oldest statesman. A number of people in that parliament, they accord him the status of a very honorable person. But there are a number of families who don't see like that, who see Buthelezi as someone who brought misery to them, as well as someone who made them to be orphaned. And so I think that the historians and the academics, when they deal with Mangosuthu, they must give all the layers that are covering the man.
Now, and then there is the unresolved issue of the Ingonyama Trust, which covers vast portions of the KwaZulu-Natal province. What is the real bone of contention here?
Look, you know, the issue of Ingonyama Trust, again, Mangosuthu is a political fox. He sees himself there as someone who was fighting for the recognition of the monarchy, as someone who was fighting for the government to recognize that the Zulu people are a nation within the South African nation, and that land must be preserved to the Zulu people because of the Anglo-Boer War and so forth. And so I think the issue of Ingonyama Trust really, when it comes to that, is something that he sees that number of people, especially the Zulu people, must not let it go just like that. And also he sees himself, remember that he has been kind of an adversary to the king, and so he wants to leave that legacy that says, I gave the people, or the Zulu people, land. I gave the Zulu people the identity, and I preserve the monarchy, because he is kind of a person who still believes in the Zulu nationalism.
Thank you very much indeed, yes. And of course, he's turning 91 on Tuesday. Well, that was political analyst Xolani Dube talking to us from our studios in Durban.